Right, we're starting off with Skandar Mirza. This is the third ministry that we study after 1947. Skandar Mirza ruled from 1955 to 1958, and it is regarded as one of the most important ministries of the Pakistani politicians after 1947 to 1999, because it was during Skandar Mirza's ministry that Pakistan got its first constitution of 1956. So let's start off with the 4 mark questions. Who was Skandar Mirza? Skandar Mirza ruled after Ghulam Muhammad from 55 to 58. His era brought political crisis in Pakistan as he dismissed many prime ministers during this time. So yeah, Skandar Mirza's era is also regarded as one of the most turbulent times of Pakistani politics and the constitutional crisis that was there, because many prime ministers were dismissed. We're going to have a detailed look at it later on in the topic. He introduced one unit scheme. This was one of the reforms introduced by Skandar Mirza. We'll look at it as well. In his rule, he extended telephone and railway lines too. He also had a clash with Ayub Khan, who imposed martial law and ended his rule. So Skandar Mirza's rule was ended by the imposition of martial law by Ayub Khan. What was the one unit scheme? So we're talking about the scheme, this reform that was introduced during this time period. One unit policy was introduced by Skandar Mirza, which stated that all the units, all the provinces of West Pakistan would be combined as a single unit. So Skandar Mirza was a firm believer of federation, federal form of government, which this government was sort of also an idea of Jinnah. Jinnah, right after partition of Pakistan, preferred having a federal form of government. And the reason for that was कि अगर एक single federation होगा तो people it will be easy to govern these provinces. You see, the central government would be making all the laws. Central government would be changing those laws, passing those laws. So the power would just be there with the federation, and nobody else or the provinces will have individual say in that, and this will just make the country more stronger. So Jinnah's ideology for a federation or behind a federation was to strengthen the constitution of the political system of the country, because Pakistan was really made after the in 1947, and the country needed a very strong government to establish it or to to keep it flourishing. Yeah. So at that point in time, Jinnah's ideology behind the federation was just to establish a strong country. So Skandar Mirza had a similar ideology, and this is the reason why he introduced this one unit scheme, which stated that all of the provinces of West Pakistan would be combined as a single unit. You see, it was introduced to promote nationalism, uprooting provincial extremism. However, it faced much criticism from the province of West Pakistan and East Pakistan. The scheme was later abolished. Provinces didn't want the scheme to be implemented because they wanted provincial autonomy. They wanted power to be with the provinces. East Pakistanis were also not happy with this, because East Pakistanis, you see, East Pakistan had always been sort of neglected. Because they had this resentment that all of the developmental projects were taking place in the West Pakistan. The politicians were focusing more on the West Pakistani side. So East Pakistan sort of felt neglected from the very beginning. So यहाँ पे आके भी, when this policy was implemented, the East Pakistanis were not happy and they wanted the abolishment of it, right? Okay, so the next, we're moving on to 7 mark questions now. Why did Skandar Mirza dismiss so many prime ministers? So we just talked about this in the beginning, that a constitutional crisis was there during the time of Skandar Mirza because prime ministers were dismissed. Let's look at this objectively and let's see how and which prime ministers specifically were dismissed. So he dismissed Chaudhry Muhammad Ali, as he himself wanted to resign. Moreover, in his own party, Muslim League, problems had arisen. As a result, Skandar Mirza dismissed him as he could not properly handle the matters of state, and also had failed to control his own political party. So Chaudhry Muhammad Ali sort of himself wanted to resign, and Skandar Mirza used that as a reason that Muhammad Ali was not able to manage the political affairs or the internal matters of state or the affairs of his own political party. So this was used as a reason to dismiss Muhammad Ali. The second Prime Minister, Ibrahim Ismail Chandragar, II Chandragar, was appointed after Chaudhry Muhammad Ali, and he was also removed because he proved to be a poor Prime Minister. Why? Because his government was a coalition government with some other political parties. So coalition government kya hoti hai? Coalition government is when, let's say, a single political party wins, that political party having lesser majority in the parliament will need support for the political parties to form a central government. तो अगर तो लेट्स से आपकी रिक्वायर्ड नंबर ऑफ सीट्स जो इलेक्शंस के बाद आप विन करते हो वो कम है, तो यू नीड सपोर्ट फ्रॉम अदर पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज to complete that required number of seats to form a government. So Aya Chandragar's government was a coalition government. Okay, so they had to form this coalition with the Muslim League, but you see बहुत जगह पे कोलिशन गवर्नमेंट का एक बहुत बड़ा डिसएडवांटेज ये होता है कि जो कोलिशन पार्टीज होती हैं दे टेक एडवांटेज ऑफ यू, वो पावर में आने के लिए दे फॉर्म कोलिशन, बट लेटर ऑन दे they take advantage of their position and the position of the coalition partners to exploit them, to put forward their demands, or maybe I would say inappropriate demands in some cases for their own interests, placing their personal interests above the national interest. So this is, we've seen this during the course of history. पाकिस्तान के different governments में आज तक ऐसा होता है और ऐसा हो रहा है. तो you see, Aya Chandragarh formed this government with the help of Muslim League. But what happened was that they could not have an agreement of serious problems such as winning support for one unit scheme. Chandragarh was dismissed by Iskandar Mirza. So disagreements बहुत ज़्यादा आते हैं. यहाँ पे these political parties, they used to disagree on different matters. For example, one unit scheme के ऊपर भी Muslim League was not agreeing on it. So the scheme was also sort of abolished later on. इसी वजह से Iskandar Mirza had to dismiss Aya Chandragarh as the prime minister. So after Aya Chandragarh, Hussain Shahid Suhrawardy was appointed as the next prime minister of Pakistan. Okay, so Hussain Shahid Suhrawardy was a very popular prime minister, and because Iskandar Mirza also wanted to maintain or sustain his power, so he saw Suhrawardy's power growing at that time, and he was threatened by this growing power of Hussain Shahid Suhrawardy. So Iskandar Mirza dismissed Suhrawardy and he was forced to resign because Iskandar Mirza sort of feared losing his power. And the reason that was used over here was that Suhrawardy failed to create an economic stability in the country. So hence he was dismissed. Next. Why was one unit scheme introduced in the first place? So we went through a 4-mark question for the one unit scheme. We'll look at it in detail now, that why was it specifically introduced. I explained one of the reasons to you guys, that ideology now was being implemented over here, that Iskandar Mirza wanted provinces to be united, to have a strong central government. Let's look at other two reasons as well. So Iskandar Mirza introduced one unit scheme to abolish provincialism and promote nationalism. The people living in different provinces had different lifestyles, languages, and cultures. They were more loyal towards their own provinces. Therefore, one unit scheme was introduced by Iskandar Mirza so that nationalism could be promoted and people of Pakistan would be united. So to remove these cultural, social differences, you could say that primarily this is the reason why one unit scheme was introduced, to promote a sentiment of nationalism, to promote unity, and to abolish provincialism. Another reason why Iskandar Mirza introduced one unit scheme was to strengthen administration by combining all the provinces into one unit, West Pakistan, and by making 2 wings. The resources could be shared equally and there could be developments in both wings of Pakistan. So we're talking about the West Wing and the East Wing. So since East Wing was grouped as a single unit and Iskandar Mirza grouped the West Wing as a single unit after combining these provinces, the reason and you could say, the reason again here was to equally share the resources between both of these wings and to govern both of these wings equally. But again, even after the implementation of one unit scheme, the East Pakistanis resented, they felt threatened. Political leaders in West Pakistan had a fear of that East Pakistan might gain more power and might dominate them due to their larger population. So one unit scheme was introduced according to which there would be equal number of seats for both East and West Pakistan. So one unit scheme was introduced to keep power in the hands of West Pakistan. Acha, abhi humne baat ki thi ke they're going to have 2 wings, East Wing and the West Wing. अब इक्वालिटी की जब हम बात कर रहे हैं, जब हम ये कह रहे हैं कि the political leaders wanted equal representation, equal political representation for both the wings, the East and the West. इसका मतलब ये है कि both the wings will have equal number of seats in the parliament. अब you see the seats are usually allocated depending upon the number of population, number of people living in a certain area. So अगर East Pakistan की population ज़्यादा है, तो technically and fairly they should have greater representation in the parliament. यहाँ पे ये था कि because East Pakistanis had a greater population and they deserved to have more number of seats, West Pakistani politicians feared that East Pakistanis might gain more power. सीट से क्या होता है, आपके ज्यादा लोग हैं पार्लियामेंट में, जब कोई लॉ पास होगा तो आपको ज्यादा वोट्स मिल जाएंगे, सिंपल. So those people would vote for their own laws, and obviously it will be difficult for the West Pakistanis to get their laws implemented. क्योंकि East Pakistanis will have greater say. ज्यादा लोग होंगे, they can vote out, they can vote in for certain things. So just to keep that number low, or to keep the power in the hands of West Pakistan, they introduced the scheme. This is also stated as one of the reasons. Why were there so many governments between 51 and 58? Guys, remember in the last topic we studied the change of governments during during Ghulam Muhammad's time, 51 to 58, 55, sorry, and then 55, 58. So we've studied this topic of constitutional crisis in the previous lecture, some reasons for the change of government from 51 to 55. And we've also gone through a question for the change of governments from 55 to 58. So this question over here asks you for combined reasons for the change of government from 51 to 58. Okay? So I'm going to simply skip this question because you can write your reasons now. You've gone through the individual questions. What you can do is you can pick up one or two reasons from Ghulam Muhammad's time from 51 to 55 and one or two reasons from Skandar Mirza's time, 55 to 58, and then write them together as the answer. Okay. Why was the first constitution 1956 abrogated in 1958? So guys, remember the first constitution was introduced in 1956. You can go to the constitution details from any textbook that you're using, because you won't be asked to comment on the constitution, all right? Mostly it was a 4-tier system. It also followed the 1-unit scheme. So if you want to go through these details, you can use any resource book. You can just simply search on the 56 constitution. But in the exam paper, you won't be asked to comment on the constitution in detail, okay? We're looking at the reasons why this constitution was abrogated in 1958. So Skandar Mirza became unpopular by the end of his reign. Ayub Khan obviously was about to take over. Many prime ministers were removed. He tried to retain his power as the president and introduce the 56th constitution, which promised to hold elections in 57. But Skandar Mirza knew that he had become so unpopular that the elections would prove dangerous for him and he might lose his power. So this constitution was abrogated to save himself, to save Skandar Mirza. Again, you see how constitution was sort of manipulated and used for the interests of political leaders. That's very unfortunate. The 56th constitution was also cancelled because of the opposition from East Pakistan, equal number of seats. East Pakistanis wanted more number of seats. Ab you see, just say 1-unit scheme, they tried to give equal number of seats to the East Pakistanis. Even this constitution stated that both the West and the East one will have equal number of seats in the parliament. And one of the reasons here was that West wanted to maintain its power. So West Pakistan did not follow the true democracy, and resentment was created among East Pakistanis who gave up their support for the 56th constitution, leading to its abolishment. So East Pakistanis did not approve of this constitution. They were against it because they wanted more number of seats. Another reason for the abrogation of the 56th constitution was the federal form of government. You see, again, 1-unit scheme sort of acted as a foundation for this constitution. Central government would help provincial government to handle the matters of state. However, limited autonomy was given to provinces and central government directly controlled and handled affairs of state. Also, bureaucrats were appointed who took control over economic and political resources. So the 1956 constitution was opposed by provinces as they could not rule freely. As a result, the government had to cancel the 56th constitution. All right, I hope you're getting this point. Provinces had limited autonomy and bureaucrats were appointed to look after the economic and political resources. Provinces wanted a free rule, they wanted autonomy, and this is the reason why they didn't support the 56th constitution, because it was sort of going against what the provinces wanted. All right, now Let's look at a 14-mark response. How successful was the ministry of Skandar Mirza during 55 to 58? Now we're analyzing the entire ministry altogether. We're looking at all the successes and all the failures of Skandar Mirza's ministry. Okay, let's look at the failures first of all. One of the first failure was the one unit scheme. It was introduced by Skandar Mirza for good purposes, such as to promote nationalism, but it faced much criticism from East Pakistan as well as the provinces due to equal number of seats for both wings of Pakistan and because it affected the culture of provinces. As it received so much opposition and created resentment among people, it is considered as a failure for the ministry of Skandar Mirza. So resentment, opposition from all the wings, from the provinces, from the west wing, from the east wing, sort of caused this policy to fail. And the failure of this policy was a failure of Skandar Mirza's ministry. Another failure of this ministry was the dismissal of several prime ministers. Skandar Mirza dismissed many prime ministers such as Firoz Khan, Noon Ibrahim Ismail Chandigarh, Hussain Shahid Suhrawardy for different reasons. Guys, we're talking about the same constitutional crisis here. Such as failure to form coalition government to win support for unity, Mirza also wanted to keep powers to himself. So he dismissed Prime Minister Suhrawardy. This created political crisis in Pakistan and the ministry failed in forming stable government. तो जब बहुत ज़्यादा प्राइम मिनिस्टर चेंज होता है तो उसका नुकसान कंट्री को होता है. पाकिस्तान में ये चीज़ वेरी अनफॉर्चुनेट कि कोई भी पॉलिटिकल पार्टी ने अब तक अपने 5 years गवर्नमेंट कंप्लीट नहीं किए, कहीं ना कहीं रिमूवल हो जाता है फॉर डिफरेंट रीजंस. तो यहाँ पे उसकी वजह से उसका नुकसान सिर्फ मुल्क को होता है. पॉलिटिकल क्राइसिस, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन क्राइसिस, बिकॉज यू सी इफ अ गवर्नमेंट introduces certain laws and then the government gets removed, the new government would reverse those laws altogether and they'll introduce new laws. Here, the new government, let's say, gets removed, so their laws would also be removed by the upcoming government. इससे क्या हो रहा है? Instability आ रही है, unstable governments आ रही है, कोई भी law ज़्यादा टाइम के लिए implement नहीं हो सकता. All right. So this constitutional crisis was a failure of the ministry of Skandar Mirza because he could not handle the affairs of politics. All right. Though this ministry was successful to create a new constitution in Pakistan, it had to be abolished. देखिए constitution तो बन गया, successful, but सिर्फ 2 सालों के लिए. So constitution was also not a success. It was abolished. It was abrogated. So according to it, there would be equal number of seats for both East and West Pakistan, and that the form of government would be federal. Due to equal representation of both wings, East Pakistan opposed the 1956 constitution, as they had larger population and provinces criticized us as they could not rule their areas freely. It created resentment among the people of both wings of Pakistan and had to be abolished, so it was a failure. Right? So the 56 constitution, its abolishment was a failure. The constitution to ban gaya lekin chal nahi saka. Another failure of Skandar Mirza was that he could not conduct elections because he wanted to save himself. There was a poor law and order situation in the country. Elections are at times the only solution to the political crisis in the country. Skandar Mirza ke time pe, his unpopularity and his determination to just keep himself in power was hurting Pakistan's democracy at that time. Because the people had to decide. Democracy is for the people, by the people, right? So how can you deny this basic right of people to choose their own political leader? ये तो हर इंसान का right है जो democracy में रह रहा है. और वैसे तो यहाँ पर Pakistanis had to decide for themselves. They had to vote for their own leader. Skandar Mirza resisted that because he knew people would not vote for him. All right. So this was sort of going against him here, and then it was a failure. Ayub Khan considered Mirza responsible for the turmoil in Pakistan, and he took direct control of the government, or martial law. ये तो फिर खराब हो गया काम सारा यहाँ पे. All right. However, there were some achievements of this ministry too. Okay, let's look at a few successes. Constitution making process. अब constitution का आना ही एक success है. वो अलग बात है कि चला 2 साल या बाद में abolish हो गया. But just the fact that constitution was introduced, it was considered as an achievement of the government. Another achievement of the ministry was the extension of telephone lines, communication, public transportation. So all of these development projects were a success. And the railway lines were extended. People could travel raw materials. People could travel themselves. Trade was boosted. So yeah, all of these were a few successes. But you see, because we've written 4 failures and 3 successes, this ministry was a failure overall. And you can write an evaluation at the end stating that this ministry was not a success. Just analyze a few failures in 2 to 3 lines while writing the last paragraph of evaluation. So guys, this was it. Let me know if there's any question. You can contact me through any portal, through the Academy's website, or you can just reach out to me by contacting us through the website of the Academy, and you can ask the administration to connect you with me if you have any questions about any of the topics or specifically this topic. Thank you so much.